Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. You know what's really important to me when I do business with a company is trust and transparency. I've been telling you now for a good while about my buddy Damon Burton and his company, SEO National, because trust and transparency are just as important to them. You know, for the last 15 years, in the search engine optimization space, they have been leading the way and serving people tremendously well. Now, for those of you that don't know what SEO is, it stands for search engine optimization. It helps you show up higher on Google searches so that folks that are looking for what you have find you quicker. And you know what's really encouraging? More revenue, more sales, growing your business. Do me a favor, get in touch with Damon and his team today at SEO National at 855-736-6285 or go to SEOnational.com and get your free quote and tell them you heard it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. I hope you're ready, because here comes a dynamite conversation on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. A little bit of a different setup. You know, those of you that are regular subscribers and you're watching this on YouTube, I've got my glasses on. I don't normally have my glasses on. And it was like, what's this behind you? Well, you know, we've got about 8 inches of snow as we record this podcast. And your boy here did not feel like trudging through the snow to his podcast studio. And so we're doing this a little bit differently. But the conversation is going to be worth staying for. And I have a powerful couple here with me this morning, Byron and Mariah Edgington, and they've just written a new book. They're going to tell us about it. They're going to tell us their story. This is going to be a podcast, I believe, that you're probably going to want to hit replay on a couple of times. Maybe watch it again on YouTube. And so again, it's an honor to have Byron and Mariah. You get a 2-for-1, folks. You get a double. You not only get one guest voice, you get 2 guest voice, and I'm going to try not to mess this up too badly, but Byron and Mariah Edgington are joining me today on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Byron, Mariah, how are you guys today?
We have never been better, and thank you so much for your time and for having us on, and also for getting our names exactly right.
Well, you know, listen, if you can, I learned this, Byron. The first 2 years that I did public address for high school basketball, my son went to a Christian school in the area, and the year that he was there, his freshman year, they had a prep basketball team. There was a young man from Poland that was on that team. There was a young man from the Dominican Republic that was on that team. The second year, they had a young man from Russia on that team. They had a young man from Belgium on that team. And so I got really good at learning how to pronounce names. In fact, they had a young man from the Netherlands on that team. And so, you get really good at pronouncing. In fact, one of the young men he played basketball with is at Southern Illinois right now, and his last name is Verplanken. So when I would say that, I would go, his name is Steven Verplanken. I would say Steven Verplanken. Like the Dutch might like the roll that R. So you Edgington is not a problem when you're used to saying Verplanken and Suhanif and Marambu and Ivanovic and so that's not a problem at all. So and I love those kids that my son played basketball with. But thank you guys for joining us this morning.
Sounds like a very inclusive school. That's wonderful.
Well, it did help that those kids could play basketball. That was it did help just a little bit. They were all in fact, we were the young man from Poland. His name is Marek Ivanovic. I always said that one day I'm going to look up and I'm going to see Marek as the Prime Minister of Poland. That kid was that gifted, that smart, that talented. So, So let's start here. And I've been starting here on every podcast and talking about this unusual time that we're in right now in the midst of an ongoing pandemic that we're almost 2 years into. And so take me through, because I know what it's been like here in West Virginia. You guys are in Iowa. Vastly, some similarities, but some differences as well too, obviously geographically. Take me through the last couple of years for you guys personally, professionally. What are a couple of lessons that you've drawn out of this time that once this is over, and I believe it will be over soon, that you will take from what you've learned that you'll carry on past the pandemic?
Wow, that's a great question. 2 years ago at this time, we lived in Colombia, South America. We were retired there, and my then 89-year-old mom lived alone in Iowa. And when the pandemic happened, she was very fearful. And I'm a registered nurse, and it would sadden me if my mother had succumbed to COVID alone here in the US, and I could have done something different about it. So in May 20, we hopped on a humanitarian flight and returned to the US, and now the three of us live together. It's been a real gift to be able to be here for my mom, and she did not develop COVID. We're very fortunate. Our family has been very fortunate during the pandemic. And Brian, I'm really so glad that we have had this opportunity to support her and be here with her during this difficult time. So for me, it was a period of growth, because you, as a 60-year-old woman, I don't feel like I was planning to have my mom live with me, but I am blessed to be able to support her in that way.
Mariah, I've got to ask. So your mom is in Colombia, South America.
No, she was here in Iowa.
She was there. Yeah, forgive me. So you guys were in South America. She was here. Was there ever those heartstring moments, like, my mom's 89. Why am I so far away from her when I could be so close? Did you ever have those heartstring moments? And Byron, I want to kind of ask you this as well too. How do you support as a husband? I know what I would do. I would say, I would try to encourage my wife and comfort my wife and things like that. What were kind of some things that you were feeling as Mariah was kind of dealing with these emotions she was feeling with her mom being, not pushing 90, but getting close to 90. There's a global pandemic that's happening that is affecting elderly people. At that time, it was really targeting elderly folks. Byron, I want to get your perspective. How were you compartmentalizing and handling these things? And what were you doing to encourage Mariah during that time?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Thanks for putting that out there. First of all, I need to tell you and your listeners, there's no daylight between us. We consider ourselves a we instead of separate entities, if you will.
Yeah.
But we knew it was the right thing to do, partly because, there's a parallel going on here, because we lived in Hawaii many years ago. We lived on the island of Kauai for 3 years. And while we were there, my father started going downhill and was in the last 5 or 6 months of his life. And Mariah said, let's move back to Columbus to be with your dad. And so we did. I mean, it wasn't even a question of whether I would go alone and she'd stay in Hawaii. It was never even a question. And so we have just always supported each other that way, even when it came to, the big decisions. Like, as we love living in Colombia, the temperature was absolutely perfect. We loved the people of Colombia. They're the gentlest, most courteous people in the world. And we just really, we considered that to be home. But when the pandemic came along and Mariah's mom was alone and she needed us there, we packed up and went to Iowa, and here we are. So,
how big of a transition was that? Because again, a lot of people, my family moved around some when I was a kid, and so I was kind of used to it. Like, okay. And when my wife and I got married, she had always lived really close. Her mom lives about a mile from where we live now. She grew up out here where we live. she had never moved away, and I got an opportunity to take a job about an hour away. And it wasn't foreign for me, but to her it was like moving to the moon. It was moving far away from her support system, things like that.
Sure.
When you guys think about the transitions that you've made, and I'm fascinated because there was never a question. And I think some younger couples, and we kind of went through this, like, okay, is this the right move? Is this what we want to do? Is this where we want to go? You guys really never had any of that. You mentioned a moment ago, Byron, that the weather was great. The people were wonderful. Do you find yourself at times missing what you left behind? Or is it the overwhelming factor of we're here where we need to be at this time of life? Because I think that's a maturity thing a lot of times. I think people,
I think so too.
the older you, and I'll be 50 in August, the older you get, you realize that settling and stability and doing the right things and just being where you need to be is a way more powerful attractant than, having, doing, being. So, is there ever a moment where you think to yourself, man, I wonder what the weather would be like in Colombia. I wonder what things would be like today. Or do you just find yourself just saying, no, this is where we need to be right now for this season of our lives?
Yeah. Well, it would be pretty easy when it's -8 Fahrenheit. But,
Well,
Yeah, it would be pretty easy.
there is a saying in Spanish, which of course neither one of us spoke Spanish, but we learned the language while we were there. And it's no mas nieve. And I used to say that frequently to people there, no mas nieve para mí, which means no more snow for me. But as we can tell now, Brian, that's clearly untrue.
yeah.
And the thing is, I think as people, we all have questions. It would be an untruth to say, no, you never look back and say, was that good or bad or anything? What we do know is that it was absolutely 100% the correct decision.
Yeah.
And my mother doesn't go a day without thanking us for being here with her. And that's priceless. There is no money in the world that can replace that.
Yeah.
And so with that, the other thing that happened because of this is we became more grateful and more gracious about this. And so we started really doing more gratitude in and around that. And that's how our project now came about.
Yeah.
Because we feel that we are so blessed to have what we have. And I know your listeners will resonate with this when you have gratitude in your life and we take advantage of all of that and put it towards good, then that's when we can make a difference in the world. And so we're working on a project that is for people who are overwhelmed and really feeling like their resources are running thin. Both Byron and I came from the medical background. He was an air medical pilot and I was a flight nurse. So we lifted people up for years and tried to help them in any way we could. So this now allows us through our book and our writing and making a difference to so many people by lifting them up.
Mariah, I love what you said there, because the thing about it is that in both of your careers, when you got people on a flight that you were on, Byron, you're piloting the flight, Mariah, you're aiding and assisting. If a person's on that flight, nothing good is happening at that moment.
That's right.
It's either a traumatic situation that has just happened, or maybe you're trying to life flight someone to a transplant situation where moments are critical. Did you ever think about how that training impacted you when you were making the different moves in your life? You mentioned being in Hawaii. Byron, your dad is not doing well. I got to tell you, Columbus, Ohio is nothing like Hawaii. And I've never been to Hawaii, but I've been to Columbus a bunch of times, and Columbus is 3 hours from here. There is nothing similar about Columbus, Ohio, and Hawaii. It's kind of like that old saying, which of these things is not like the other? It's Columbus, Ohio, and it's Hawaii. But again, you got that opportunity. Your whole career and your whole life was making split-second decisions, making that. Did you find, and with this move as well, did you guys find some of that background and training kind of kicking in when the moment was your mom, you started to see some things, maybe you would video chat with her or something? And I always find that fascinating because my wife's 98-year-old grandfather, we did some video chatting with him when he was alive and he was in assisted living, and watching him talk not through a phone that he'd had in his house that he would put on speaker so he could hear it and talk into it and hold it up to his ear, actually video chatting. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder what he thinks of this technology that he can see his great grandson. But did the training that you guys had, did it kick in your decision making in those moments? Because some people would be like, well, we really have to think about this. And to hear you guys talk about it, you've made two major moves and you go, there's no thought process to it. We're just going to do it. Do you feel like your background and what you did before helped you with that decision making process?
Yeah, that's a very good point, Brian. And I guess my answer to that would start with awareness. When we were flying medical patients, you have to be aware every second of the time what's going on with that patient. And in my case, I had to be aware of what the aircraft was doing, what the weather was doing,
Yeah,
the
great point,
distances
Byron.
we had to go. And in fact, that's one of the topics, one of the themes in our book. I should bring up the title, I guess. The title of the book is Journey Well, You Are More Than Enough. And one of the main themes of that book is awareness, because especially during this pandemic, we have learned that awareness is a critical advantage in a lot of situations. And if we had just blown this off and not paid any attention to what Mariah's mom was telling us, and when we Zoomed with her, what she was saying and what she was not saying. But and I'm not patting myself on the back here, but I think you're right. I think that training we had over a number of years in medical patients probably at least predisposed us to be more aware of what people were saying, and maybe especially what they were not saying.
Yeah.
So I think there was a connection there. Yeah.
Well, Byron, here's what, and Mariah, this is what I'm pulling out of this, and I think the audience will pull this out as well. There are times that we know what's right in front of us, right? You were talking about knowing your aircraft, knowing the weather conditions, which is probably more important than knowing the aircraft itself, because the weather can change in a moment's notice, and that's the great unknown. That's the variable that you probably can never plan for 100% of the time. And Mariah, you had to be focused on something happening in the moment. Maybe that patient was stable when they got on the aircraft. Maybe the blood pressure drops, or something is happening in literally a split second. And most people can do that. Most people can just pivot and go. And I feel like you guys can do that. And then some people are like, well, but we don't want to leave. Boy, we just got settled here.
You're
Wow,
right.
we just got here, and doggone it, can't mom see that we just want to live our best life, or dad the same way. And you guys were in a couple. Here's what strikes me. And here's where I want to go real quick, and then we'll step aside and take a break. I find it fascinating. You work hard all your life. You're in a high stress, high performance. You both are in high stress, high performance careers. You go to these destination places and you just want to take some time and settle down and just exhale.
Yeah.
And then life says, there's another challenge. that you guys, and you've done this all your life, you've responded to challenges all your life. How do you keep yourself, and after we come back from break, we'll dive into this a little more, but I want to set this up this way. How do you push back those emotions of, can't we just settle here for a minute and just exhale? Do we always have to keep responding to challenges? Did you ever find times, Byron with your dad, Mariah with your mom, did you ever find those times that those emotions of, can't we just stay here a little longer? Did those creep up, and how did you kind of beat those back and say, but the right thing to do is to do what we need to do?
Good point.
How did you beat those back? How did you beat those emotions back?
That is a very great question, Brian, because
thank you, Mariah. I try. I really do try.
It is. It's really insightful, because one thing that we do know, after there's an awareness that there is a choice, and we had the opportunity to make a choice either way. So it's in the decisions that you make from that awareness that really comes down to it. Now, I know a lot of your audience would resonate with this about being very prayerful about that and taking that to a higher level. And I believe that when you are in tune with your own belief system, and you can put faith in that, and knowing that your choices are there and that they will become clear to you, your decision that you make will become obvious. And for us, both with mom and dad, those were really easy decisions. Now, not in and around all the things that we had to do, because we've purchased things just like everybody else, but we've given them away. And the interesting thing is, each time we moved, we watched as we gave away things to people, and we knew that those were people we were giving our possessions to who needed them. And so not only were we able to do the right thing for our parents, we also made an impact on the community around us. And each time we did that, an interesting thing happened. More came back to us after we landed where we were supposed to be.
Well, that's not an accident. I mean, again, because here's what I'll get, and I promise we will take just a short break, but here's where I want to lead us to in this next segment is the impact. You know, you mentioned that people needed those things. Mm-hmm. I'd like to think that every time that person either looked at, touched, or felt that item, it reminded them of you. Mm-hmm. And so your impact continues to live on through the things that you gave away in every place. And that's the whole goal of life, is to leave a piece of yourself at every stop on the road of life that you are on, to do that. And then it's a great place for us to step aside and take a break. My guests today are the authors of the book Journey Well, You Are More Than Enough. When we come back, Mariah said something that I want to dive just a little bit deeper on. The opportunity that comes with making a choice. And I think a lot of people, here's why I want to dive into that. Well, let's step aside, take a break, and then we'll do that. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but we'll do that. Byron and Mariah Edgington, my guest on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton here. The new year is upon us, and you may be sitting there thinking, hey, I would really love to pay off some debt, or I would like to save for that dream vacation. Maybe you want to buy a new car. Whatever it is you want to do financially in the coming year, let me give you a great piece of intentional encouragement and something to think about that might help you do it. products for profit. Now, this is a course taught by my good friend Joe Hart, who's been a guest on the Intentional Encourager podcast and has told his story how reselling changed his life. And you know what, folks? It could do the same thing for you too. It's really simple. Reselling is basically buying a product and then reselling it online for more money. And Joe is going to take you through the steps and show you how to do this either part-time or maybe, as some of his students have done, take this full-time as well. Go to coachjoe89.gumroad.com/L/premium PFP. And oh, by the way, this group is going to help you find leads of products that are profitable right now, give you all kinds of great intentional encouragement, and you're going to be surrounded by a community of people that are going to want to see you be successful in the reselling game. Again, go to coachjoe89.gumroad.com/L/premium PFP and tell him you heard about it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Byron, Mariah, before we went to break, we were talking about Mariah. You said the opportunity of having a choice. I love that. That is so beautifully framed. You mentioned as well, too, you had so much to do with each time that life presented you with that choice, that opportunity, and you had things to do. From a logistical standpoint, I would think logistics would be right in your guys' wheelhouse because you've made moves, and even in your career, and I keep going back to the career because I think there's a lot of things that training taught you guys that life probably couldn't, just because the ability of, and Byron, I think about, I've never flown an airplane, but I would have to think that you would have to be, one of your tools of training would have to be, you have to be really good at logistics. You have to know where to land the plane. You have to know where to fly in and out of. You have to have awareness of the area. So I would think logistics would have to be a top training tool. And Mariah, the same thing. I have to know where things are in my workspace because I need, in a moment's notice, I may need to grab something. I may have a patient that is going into cardiac arrest. I need to know where those paddles are so I can shock them if I need to, or the defibrillator. And so logistically, I would think you guys would have to be very seasoned at it. When you think about the opportunity of the journey, and I want to go here for just a second, was there ever a thought of, can we make a different choice? Because I love the perspective that you guys had of, well, this is what we're going to do because it's the right thing to do. But you also said the opportunity of having a choice. And I asked about those emotions a moment ago and beating that back. Was there a moment where you said to yourself, why do we have to make this choice? And here's why I want to go with that. Because I think along the journey of life, when a hard decision comes to folks, there is that seminal moment, and I've said this in my life where I've even prayed and said, Lord, why do I got to do this? Why do I have to make this choice? Why can't things just be smooth sailing? Byron, why can't there be perfect flying conditions why can't in this moment there be perfect flying conditions? Mm-hmm. Take me through the last couple of years. Let's pivot and go here. Here's where I want to go. And forgive me for kind of moving in some different directions. What have you learned through this couple of years about the choice you made to come back to Iowa and care for your mom? And give me the impact it's made on you. Forget the impact on other people. You've talked about that. What has this impact made on the two of you?
You want to take that one?
Me? I can, certainly, yeah.
I don't care who takes it. I mean, you both are here. Just go, whoever wants to talk. Yeah.
Well, let me preface this just a little bit by talking about my aviation career again. I guess I could speak for Mariah here. When I was making those choices, seriously, Brian, one of the underlying things that I always kept in mind was, I am so privileged to be able to be here for this person. I flew a helicopter in Vietnam for a year, And I was very ambivalent about my service over there and about the war itself. But at the end of the day, that service and that training, it gave me a career that I never would have had otherwise. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't a day went by, as in 20 years I flew a helicopter at the hospital here in Iowa City. And in that time I flew 3,200 patient missions. And every single one of those flights, I was just grateful for the opportunity to be able to be there and to help those people when they needed it the most. And I think Mariah would say the same thing. So it wasn't a question, every once in a while you'd say, well, really, do I have to do that? Well, yeah, you get to do this. That's the point. Yeah.
I love that perspective, Byron, because here's the thing that I would say, and I was telling you guys before we started recording, I was watching the Iowa-Kentucky Bowl game that they played. Yeah. And it struck me that during the third quarter of that game, there was a moment, and the TV crew had come out of the timeout, and they're panning to the Iowa crowd, who is it? And I believe they were playing at the Citrus Bowl in Orlando. And there was a moment in that game where the Iowa crowd just began waving.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
They began waving. And the tradition at the University of Iowa football games is that they have a children's hospital in Iowa City, and there are children that can see into the stadium from the rooms that they have, and it's something that the people at the Iowa Children's Hospital are intentional about making sure that at Iowa home football games that they can see some of the game, and the fans in mass, 75,000 fans, at a point in the game will just begin waving to the kids. And to your point, and it happens every game. And Byron, to your point about that, there is a moment of gratitude that is transferred between fan and children, children and fans. It becomes an emotional thing. The kids, they'll get the camera as close as they can, and you see these little kids with their gold and black T-shirts on, and they're just grinning from ear to ear because people are waving at them. And for a moment, they are, in essence, celebrities to 70 or 75,000 people. And in that same moment, you see the wave of emotions from the crowd toward those children. Like, I wish those kids didn't have to be in that hospital. I wish they didn't. And so the gratitude, and I love what you said there about getting to do that. I want to go here for just a minute. Can you guys take me to and I'm sure you've got moments. You make 3,200 flights. I'm sure there are flights that stick out to you. Oh. When was that moment, Byron, for you that you first felt that overwhelming sense of gratitude? And how did you keep it going for 32? Because, again, forgive me for the long-winded question, but when you do something day in and day out, it just becomes routine to you. It just, okay, I'm going to work. We've got this, we may have 3 flights today. When did you first sense that moment of gratitude, and how did you keep it fostered within you through all those flights over 20 years, day in and day out? Because that's really hard to do.
Yeah. Is that okay if I?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay, let me tell you.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I didn't mean to leave Mariah out of it, but yeah, it just. I'm just interested, Byron, what you said about the gratitude piece there. That really is resonating with me.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you a quick story, and I'm not allowed to reveal particulars about this patient. But the first winter I flew in Iowa, we got a call one night to go up north almost to the Minnesota border. A young kid, a 7-year-old, had fallen in a grain auger, and he had been beat up by this grain auger. Oh. And he lost a lot of blood. He had a lot of orthopedic injuries, and he wasn't expected to live through the night. And we went and picked him up and brought him back to Iowa City. And, I kind of get choked up when I talk about this kid. 3 weeks later, I watched him walk out of the hospital with his parents. and he wasn't expected to live that night. And so anytime you can be involved in a thing like that, even as my very minor role, I flew the kid back, to the hospital. That's all I did. But just to see what happened to him and watch him go home with his parents that day, it just made all the other, whatever peripheral, minor stuff, it just made it all go away. And I realized this is the opportunity of a lifetime. I am allowed to help these people every time I come to work. And, I can see that kid now on that night in that tiny little hospital up in that little tiny town. And I had the chance to help him and his parents. And there's just nothing like that. There's nothing like that in life.
Well, and again, I love that story because, and I've told my 21-year-old son and things like that, you never know the person you help, what they become later in life. That young man could have become a CEO of a company. He could have, been an Iowa state senator. He could have been the governor of Iowa. Could have been anything. And had you not just said to yourself, I've got a job to do. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. You and Mariah both, to do it to the best of your abilities. You never know how you change the trajectory of a lot of people's lives around it, that saving that boy's life impacted. I've got to ask you this before we take another break and we get deeper into your story. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the book. What's the single biggest piece of intentional encouragement that you have in the book that when folks read it, they go, wow, this is it. This is it. Take me into that real quick, and forgive me for not diving a little bit deeper. You guys have it's been fascinating just looking at the different perspectives of life that you guys have to offer. But one piece of intentional encouragement from your book.
Okay, that you just segued into it perfectly, because you said that you never know what somebody's going to become. And by being where he was, that situation at that time, that young child went on to become whatever they ended up being, just like you mentioned. And the interesting thing is, with the book, we're saying that starting right at this very moment of your life, if you have had things that really were even big missteps, even things that you're not proud of, things that are, oh, I shouldn't have done that, there is no changing it. And we all know that. And so instead of continuing to drag that baggage along with you, continuing to beat yourself up for those mistakes that you've made in your life, for the things that have not gone like you planned or even anyone would want, to take lessons from those, take opportunities to go ahead and put that behind you, and know that by loving yourself and by being the best person you can be in gratitude moving forward, using those as building blocks to help give a hand up to somebody who maybe was making those same mistakes that you made, but now you have put those behind you. You've used that as fertilizer for a beautiful garden to the future. And when we can come with love for ourselves, with gratitude, with respect, and bring that to other people, Brian, that's when the magic happens. When we're able to help others and serve in that way, starting from today. Maybe yesterday wasn't good. And let's not hold that against people. Let's teach them how to use those in the benefit of others.
Well, those teachable moments, Mariah, you're 100% right, and I love that perspective. Let's step aside and take a break. I want to take a break here now because I want to save room for more of your and Byron's story. And I've got a question I want to ask when we come back from break that I'm fascinated by, what you guys did in your career and in life. Byron mentioned it before in this previous segment, flying in Vietnam. So I want to get into that, their career together, working side by side. My guests, the authors of the book, Journey Well, You Are More Than Enough, Byron and Mariah Edgington. Back in a moment with more powerful conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. I want to take a moment and tell you about my friend Harry Spate and his new book, Selling with Dignity. Harry has taken an age-old concept of sales and he's put a new twist to it, and I love the direction that he's taken with Selling with Dignity. And here's what's encouraging about Harry's book. Instead of viewing people as numbers and machines, salespeople are now given the tools and the encouragement to be dignified in their approach. Here's what Harry says. He says, selling is an honorable profession when it's done right. When sellers feel they are valuable and have integrity and respect, this opens the door for better conversations and eventually relationship. This book puts an end to sleazy sales tactics and proves why selling with dignity can be done, and it leads to massive success. And I couldn't agree more. Go to sellingwithdignity.com, get your copy today, and if you want Harry to sign it, he'll do that for you. Again, go to sellingwithdignity.com and pick up your copy today of the new book by Harry Spate, Selling with Dignity. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Byron, Mariah, before the break, we were talking about this, and here's something that came to mind. And Byron, if you don't mind, and you both can answer, I am fascinated by this. Was there ever a time in your careers together that you felt the pressure to be perfect? Because here's what I'm thinking as I'm kind of putting myself in the moment. And I believe the audience is doing the same thing. I can imagine myself looking into this aircraft, equipped to handle any type of emergency. And you just mentioned the first flight you had in Iowa, and that was so powerful. And I could just imagine the emotions. But I can also imagine, too, with life hanging in the balance, the pressure to be perfect, both for you and Mariah. How were you guys able to compartmentalize that and just say, we're going to do the best we can do? It may not be perfect. It may not be 100%, but we're going to give it the best that we can do. How do you avoid thinking that every mission has to be perfect in what you guys were doing? Because, again, the weather is not your friend. The aircraft sometimes has got a mind of its own. How do you? That's what's continuing to resonate with me. How do you keep yourself from thinking that everything has to be perfect when you know it can't be?
Yeah, I think your story is in the book about the weather and how that affected your ability.
Yeah, and a lot of it, of course, is preparation. And in aviation, and well, in medicine too, for that matter, you can't eliminate risk. You always have to plan for it, and you can minimize it as much as possible, but you can't eliminate it. And so a lot of it is preparation. But you're right. You have to, at some point, you have to realize that you do the best you can. Perfection is at least elusive, if not impossible. And you have to be able to, because there were a number of flights where, quite frankly, a lot of patients didn't make it. A lot of patients died. And, we didn't go out in the helicopter for people with a hangnail. If we flew these patients, they were sick people.
Yeah. And
so you had to learn to live with those kind of outcomes that were not going to be what you want, certainly, but you had to just convince yourself that you're doing the best you can. The other side of that whole thing, Brian, is that we reinforced each other a lot, because I saw these nurses doing the best they could, and I realized how professionally and clinically excellent they were, and so it bumped my game up too. And I like to think that my expertise helped them as well. So we played off each other. And but even so, I think we all realize that perfection is just not possible, and that you learn to cherish those missions that went just as well as you expected they should.
Yeah.
That's the way you had to look at it.
Mariah, I've got to ask you this, and I so want to get into your story, but there's a real part of me that's tugging to ask these questions. So I'm going to go with my gut. I'm going to go with where I'm feeling the conversation in the moment. You are trying to help this person, but your husband is in the cockpit. How do you, and maybe there were times, Byron, where you got in the cockpit and you were feeling that stress, you were feeling that weight. Mariah, how do you compartmentalize it when you're the person you die for is up there and they're going through some of those same things, but you've got to be focused in the moment. You've got to help that person. How do you compartmentalize that? Because there are times that, and I'll share this with you, and I know it's not a great analogy, but it's the best I've got in the moment. When I'm at church and I'm on the platform, I'm playing the keyboard, I find myself looking for my wife. My wife and I have been married 25 years. I'm looking for my wife. If she leaves, I want to know what's going on, but I've got to be focused in the moment because I can't just get up and go, all right, guys, I'm out. I got to see what's going on with my wife. The music has to keep, like the Titanic, the band has to keep playing,
Sure.
and things like that. But how, Mariah, how do you compartmentalize that? How do you, because I'm trying to put myself in that moment, because I know if that were my spouse, if something was going on, my first thought would be to them instead of who I've got to help. How do you compartmentalize that? Or how did you compartmentalize that?
That is a really interesting question, because when we think about situations, we know the more prepared you are, the more you're able to handle the unexpected. And because of that, each time we went out and we didn't know exactly how it was going to go down, we leaned on our preparation that we had previously gained. So when I'd come in and I took care of micro babies, I did neonatal pediatric transport. And so I was so laser focused on their condition because I knew how quickly it could deteriorate, that I was fortunate. It didn't matter which pilot I was with. I knew that they were going to take care of the flight.
I got to ask you this. That is so incredible, because you're also a mom. You're a mom, and you're someone's baby.
Yeah.
The micro baby, as you call it. Our son was 35 weeks, born at 35
Okay.
weeks. So again, I understand preemie. I don't understand that is way that's way preemie. That's way preemie. You're a mom. You're a wife. Whether Byron's flying or he may be flying somewhere else and you're on a different aircraft, just from the luck of the draw. Again, I am fascinated how you stayed in the moment, because I know me, my mind would be 1,500 different places.
Yeah.
That's just kind of the way that I'm wired. It's not that I'm not focused in that moment, but I've got so many thoughts bouncing around in my head. How you talked about the value of preparation. Let's talk about the emotional preparation. How do you keep your emotions present and aware in that particular moment when, as a mother, you know what that mother is thinking, whether they're on that flight with you or
Right.
not? You know what that mom is thinking. You
That's
know
true.
the fears, you know the questions, you know the uncertainty. How do you keep all that in check in that moment?
Yeah, and I think that's true with any flight crew that you get or any emergency personnel, because when we go to any situation, you can even take paramedics and firefighters, and they can put themselves right in, that's could be their family too. And it's a separation. It's an absolute separation. You really focus on what you're doing and who you're there to serve at that moment, because you're with someone else's child, so you want that child or that person that you're working with to get the best care they can, no matter what. And so when you can focus in on each person being so critically important, and knowing that every life, every person in the world has value. It might be buried under a lot of things, and they might not be somebody that people would say, oh, they're worthy of something, but you let that go. And you know that, as you would say, that's God's child.
Yeah.
That you're taking care of right this moment, and that's where your focus goes, because that is your honor to serve at that moment.
Byron, I've got to ask you this, and I want to direct the question this to you, because you said something a few minutes ago that really resonated with me. And you both are saying things, and my brain, my tiny mind is just bouncing and pinging all over the place. But Byron, you said something a few minutes ago about Vietnam. And first of all, I want from this audience to you, thank you for your service to our country. We are grateful to you that you went and served all those many years ago. And again, as time marches on, you know, we tend to lose perspective of that era in our country. That's just my opinion. I want to know what lesson you took from service to your country that carried with you to public service, aside from the training, aside from the difficulty, because I can only imagine, and I've studied Vietnam. I've studied the Vietnam War. That to me, as I studied history, that was what I centered in on, was studying, and I've done a lot of study on the Vietnam War because it resonated. I was born in 1972, so I was born as that war was going on.
Yeah.
What did you take from your time there that carried into your service in serving others as a medical pilot?
Yeah, good question. Thanks for that. I guess I don't want to get into the politics of it. You know, I'm not going to do that.
Absolutely. No, I no, I don't want to go into that part of it as well too, because that is so far gone. There's nothing that can be done to change it, and there's nothing that can,
No, but I guess the upshot of what I'm going to say is that most of us, I can't speak for all of them, of course, but we realized when we got to Vietnam, most of us realized that we were in a lost cause, that we were not going to win that war. And so what that did, the positive effect of that was we knew we were in there to take care of each other and to get as many of our colleagues and many of our friends out of there alive as we could. That was at least it was my focus. And so that translates perfectly to my civilian job. You know, I looked at every one of those patients as they deserved every ounce of my awareness and my expertise, and whatever I can do to make the outcome of this flight, you know, what this patient would desire, that's what I'm going to do. And I think you're right, and there's a connection there. I think, you know, when we were in Vietnam, when I flew Huey in Vietnam, it didn't matter what the weather was. It didn't matter what the enemy situation was. If there were guys on the ground that needed me to go get them, I went and got them.
Yeah.
I didn't give it a second thought. That was my job. It was actually looking back on it, it was my honor at that point to be available for them. And that's the mentality that I used in my civilian job as well.
I love that. That's a term we don't use enough when we talk about people that serve. Is the honor that we need to give them. And I've heard, and listen, I don't want to get political here as well, but we've heard so many people be called heroes through the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And a hero can take on many different shapes, forms, and sizes. You know, helping someone that needs help across the street, to me, is heroic. You know, picking up somebody that's stranded or helping somebody stranded along the side of the road, that's heroic. You know, it doesn't have to be saving somebody's life. It could just be assisting in a moment that's a tough spot for that other person. But I am fascinated because, again, Byron, what continues to fascinate me about you and Mariah both is the things that you've seen in your lives and the things that you've experienced and the perspective that you can put those things into, to me, is incredible. Because for some people, Byron, and you know this very well, being a veteran, some people came back from Vietnam and they never left Vietnam. They never left the war. It was always with them. I had an uncle that went to Vietnam and suffered for many years because of what he brought back from Vietnam. He was never able to leave it there. Yeah. You know, what you two have seen together in the service of other people, I would have to think it would be incredibly hard to leave it there. But you guys seem to have done that beautifully. I would be remiss if I didn't pick your brains on something, because it is beautiful and powerful. And I have been riveted from the minute we hit record on this conversation. You guys have just been incredible. But I do want to be respectful of your time and the audience's time. And that is this, is that in those moments that you're going through those difficult things, I want you to share one piece of intentional encouragement that helped you guys through some difficult moments where, Byron, to your point, that patient didn't make it. Mariah, you did everything that you could have, humanly possible, to aid that. You used every trick in the book, so to speak. And I don't mean that in that way, but you pulled out all the stops. You did everything you knew to do, and the outcome just wasn't there. Maybe there are people that aren't in those life and death situations, but maybe they own a business. Maybe they're trying to deal with a loved one. They've done everything that they know to do, and the outcome still isn't there. What's your biggest piece of intentional encouragement for those folks?
Well, that one really does speak from where we are right now. And that is one of the reasons we decided this book needed to be published now, was because there's a lot of people who are in that situation where they still have, oh my goodness, why did I not do that? Why did I have that happen? And it becomes an inner critic, Brian, where they just hear that negative voice over and over and over. I should have done that. I could have done that. Why should have I? What was I thinking? And we go back to that same thought that there is not anything we can do about the past other than gain and harvest the gems from that and bring what we know now, our new knowledge from that, forward. By doing that, we're able to build ourselves up, and then we're able to reach out to others and help them. And that is the best lesson that I have personally learned from my past, where I've had situations I could continue to beat myself up for what I thought, oh, I should have known that I could have done this, or maybe I should have used that drug instead of that drug in a critical situation. But instead, I've allowed myself the grace to know that we are all human. And no matter what is in our past, if we go forward as a different person, as a person of love and kindness and respect and gratitude for what we do have and for others, that changes our life, and it changes the lives of those around us. And we're really fortunate because we both have that kind of an energy and a love and respect for human life. And we know there's so many people out there right now who need to hear that message of hope and of love and respect, to know that their life is worthy of living, that they are worth life. And that's important.
Yeah. I'd be remiss. How long have you guys been together?
Forever.
That's because she is much younger than you are, Byron. Did you marry her when she was 5? Is that what happened?
That's it.
Do you have a West Virginia marriage where you have child bride? You know.
I wouldn't touch that with.
Yeah, well, you know, I live here, so I can. You know.
You can say that, right? That's right. I love that.
You know, well, you know, years ago. I mean, you know, my parents got married when they were 18 and 16. My mom was 16 when she married my dad. You know, and you know, I knew we have a good friend of ours. She married her husband when she was 14. But you know, again, that's. I mean,
well,
you know,
that wasn't the situation for us.
No,
we've been married 261 months. We celebrate every month because our relationship is so important to us that my love for Byron just grows every day.
Yeah.
And
I can't do math that fast, so you know.
We're almost we're going on 22 years.
It'll soon be 22 years.
That's
22
wonderful.
years in March.
That's wonderful. And again, I have enjoyed every minute of this conversation. Tell folks where they can get your book, how they can connect with you guys. I'm sure people, listen, if you're watching on YouTube, how could you not fall in love with Byron and Mariah? How could you not just go, I got to connect with these folks? So tell folks how they can find your book and connect with you.
Yeah, the title is Journey Well, You Are More Than Enough. And it's on Amazon, and it'll be at our website.
Yeah, and it's when are we doing the podcast because the book will be out probably the end of February.
Tell me your website so we can.
Yeah.
It's MariahEdgington.com.
MariahEdgington.com. And I'm going to spell that for you folks. Mariah spelled M-A-R-I-A-H, Edgington, E-D-G-I-N-G-T-O-N, MariahEdgington.com. You guys have just been absolutely incredible. Byron, connect with Byron on LinkedIn as I'm connected with Byron on LinkedIn. Connect with Mariah on LinkedIn as I'm connected with Mariah on LinkedIn. You guys are going to want to connect with these folks. What a powerful conversation. I'm grateful for it. Thank you both, Byron and Mariah Edgington, for joining me on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Thank you. Journey well.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And of course, the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. If you're not subscribed to the Intentional Encourager podcast, hit the subscribe button wherever you get podcasts so you don't miss an exciting episode where you can get encouraged and stay encouraged. And remember, anyone, anywhere, at any time, any place can be an intentional encourager.